Well, welcome to this session of Kingdom Finance, the Kingdom Finance War Room. We're going to look at a few things that have been really coming to my mind and heart these last few days. And again, from last week, there have been so many things happening. I couldn't even delay this session because there's so many things I wanted to talk about. So we'll hit a few of these topical things. Why do we need to know about these things? We have to be sons of Issachar. We have to be people that know what's going on and know where it fits in the broader prophetic landscape. So many in the church are just stumbling by like sheep, eyes closed, stumbling with the crowd going into the stadium. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what's going on. They're sheeple. And we need to be different from that. One of the things we're just going to talk on now, there'll be more talk about these things later. And this just I picked up from Brandt Economics out of the United States. And really he's talking about the farmvasion. And there's a couple of interesting things I wanted to highlight. And he's really just tracked Iran, Cuba, China, Russia, Venezuela. These are the enemies in his mind of the United States. Maybe we could say they're certainly the enemies of Western thought and culture in many cases. And these are the investors in farming. And this is critical because it ties into the Great Reset. It ties into so many of these other things. It ties into end times economics, because one of the things the enemy does when he comes to steal, kill, and destroy is to cause famine. So famine is one of these things that we have to keep our watchword on. Famine is caused through not able to get farm produce. And so we have to watch the attack on farms, the attack on farming. Called it the Great Farmvasion. And again, how China is buying up farmland across America. You can see massive amounts of farmland being bought. You could say, well, why is that being bought? What does that give them? How does that create influence? I think there's another chart, which I don't have here, which shows how much of this land is close to military bases. So you can read a lot of things into what we're talking about, but it is something we definitely need to keep our finger on the pulse. We need to know what's going on. We need to be aware of it to see what's happening. And this links into the broader kind of shift. What have we seen in farms? This is, of course, the United States. We could track this in other countries, probably find things that are similar. The blue line that looks like a mountain with a little peak on it, that's farms. And you can see that somewhere in the 30s to 50s, ownership of farms has significantly dropped off. So individual landowners, farms, right, significantly drops down. But what it changes, though, is the size per farm drives up. So what you're seeing is mega farms gobbling up smaller farms, the bankrupting of small farmers, the increase of sort of large farming conglomerates, getting bigger farm sizes. But even more troubling over time, the acreage size is starting to go down. So the land currently in farming is less than it was in 1950. So there's some troubling trends there. We don't want to be eating our food from crickets. We don't want to be eating our food that's heavily processed, GMO, and all this kind of stuff. So there are some lessons that we as believers have to start building into our narrative, into our dialogue. And I'm just putting this as a marker that as we move forward to discuss lawfare and we discuss free and fair elections and we discuss all of the issues of the day that we're talking about, one of those issues is farming. One of those issues we have to watch what's going on in farming. So that's something there. The other thing I wanted to just talk about quickly, and I just pulled these out of goldandsilver.com as screenshots off the phone. So, we'll have to get better shots at some day. But it really shows the printing of money and where we're at. There's the United States, 200 years to reach 825 billion. And then in this last season on the right, it's gone up and up and up and up and up. And the chart, if you could see it, goes up dramatically after that. So it's just very illustrative of where things are at in terms of the season that we're in now. QE3, quantitative easing 3, quantitative easing 4, quantitative easing one, then you got the bank bailouts. So we have this orgy of craziness that has happened in the 2000s. Well, I wanted to put this back in perspective for us again, right? Why is this happening and what does it mean? And there's some significant events that happened this last week that feed right into that. So let me get you positioned, and then we'll talk about some of these things. The gold standard existed before Bretton Woods, right? So you had the gold standard, then the United States dollar at Bretton Woods was fixed at $30 per ounce of gold. And then the currencies around the world locked themselves into the United States dollar. So there was kind of a gold fixing after Bretton Woods, and that was through the US dollar. The US dollar took over as reserve currency and took over this sort of quasi-gold standard. Well, that was broken by Nixon in 1971. And you can see what happened after that, the gold price after that. And you can see, yes, there's been a little bit of up and down, mainly no down. The down is just adjusting the trajectory up. So there's a little bit of overheating and adjusting back on a continued upward chart. And that's basically what's happened. Now, what does that indicate? If it's going up in money, it's because people are printing money like crazy, like drunken sailors, and therefore your gold price is adjusting, the free floating gold price in the modern era. And that doesn't even, this chart is slightly older, it doesn't even pick up this latest uplift. That's only taking you to just over 1,000. We're now well over 2,000. So you can see that you can double this uplift at the back end of this chart if I could get it properly up to date. The corollary of that is fiat currencies since these times have happened. And you can see that the currencies, US dollar, British pound, Japanese yen, gold has stayed completely level in terms of a unit of value, right? 100%. And you can see that in relation to that, all of these currencies have ceased to exist. In real terms, they've ceased to exist because they've dropped down to this very, very low number, very low margin between these cycles. So they've all kind of disappeared. So we are now in this kind of area where what we're talking about is how are things working? Why are they working? Why is it still together? Why are things not operating the way they are operating? And how do we make them work from here? What are these events globally that we're talking about this week? This week, I warned about this some time back, that in the de-dollarization push that Biden seems to be doing, and of course, Biden's a sock puppet for the people behind him, and this was never more true than the fact that the G7 all did this. But basically what they've agreed to do is to provide $50 billion to Ukraine from Russian assets. From Russian assets. Well, what does that mean? Of course, Russia says, well, that's theft. I think a lot of people and economists in the West agree with that, but it's basically taking the assets that people had to hold in dollars because of the dollarization of their economies, the petrodollars and things like that. They had to keep US dollar reserves, and they're basically taking those from the people and saying, we're going to give these to your enemies. That is crossing a Rubicon. That's crossing a red line that has never been crossed before, because everybody else is looking at this and saying, well, hang on, Saudi is going to be looking at this and saying, well, hang on, what if we do something that the US doesn't like? Is our money going to be taken away from us to go and fund the LGBTQ agenda because we don't support that? What other woke issue is going to come up that's going to cause, they've crossed this Rubicon to treat your other people's assets as not being theirs. One, it's illegal. As somebody said, that this could lead to Russia challenging Euroclear in the courts. If that happens, they could go to the courts in China, Hong Kong, a couple of other countries where Euroclear has assets. What could that mean if they have judgment to go around and destabilize the world economy? Now, it would have been much worse if they'd taken the entire pot of Russian assets and converted it to their own use. In this case, what they're doing is sort of going at it sideways. We're going to take the interest on those things over that we're holding, and we're going to steal the interest and put it into funding Ukraine. But the reality is it's still the same pot, still the same pot. If somebody takes my investment income that I've put my capital aside for, it's still something that I feel is mine and that I'm entitled to. This is a quote from the same BBC article. Some of those in Kiev who have been pushing for this cash had wanted the G7 to release the whole frozen fund of some 300 billion, not merely the interest it is generating. The European Central Bank had ruled that out. Why? The bank's president, Christine Lagarde, has previously warned that such a move risked, and here's the key quotation marks, breaking the international order that you would want Russia to respect. So what they're saying is we have a post-war, post-Bretton Woods, we have a Bretton Woods world order that we want people to adhere to. So if we totally break it, then why would they respect anything? Why would they use the US dollar for anything? That's the whole de-dollarization thing. And if we de-dollarize, which some people could say might be a good thing for certain nations, I'm certainly not saying the reserve currency being the US is godly or anything. It's just the stability of the system that we're in. So this is a major, major, major upheaval. They've taken a halfway house and stolen the interest, not the principal. So they can say, oh, we didn't touch your money. We're just not letting you profit from your money during this cycle. But it still is crossing these lines that should never be crossed, because why in the world would anybody use the US dollar if the US elites, the post-war rules-based order oligarchs, can simply take this money and do with it what they will? So it could lead to a period, I think Russia has said that they're going to be looking at their options, where Russia starts seizing other assets of European states. It's pushed Russia into a better economic position, some would argue, because they've had to focus on the underlying value of their economy based on their hardcore assets, right? If you did that to other countries, what assets do they own? Well, hang on. If you're getting all your stuff made in China and shipping it in, all you are is a shipping company. It's very difficult to say what the asset base is. If you say we're going to de-petrol our economy, therefore we're going to buy it in from Saudi Arabia and other places, well, really, is that then an asset of yours? I guess it's an asset in the ground with laws that you can't take it out. So very, very difficult place to put people in. And I believe that, and many others believe, that it's accelerating this economic collapse, de-dollarization collapse, the creaking chair that we've spoken about before. And of course, that was immediately followed, because Saudi Arabia is looking at Saudi Arabia ending their 80-year petrodollar deal with the US for multi-currency sales. So what happened when Bretton Woods was done away with in 70, I think it was 71, then shortly thereafter, I think it was in 74, June 8th, 1974, they did a deal with Saudi Arabia that any transactions in oil globally had to be done in US dollars, which means that if I'm in Brazil and I'm buying oil from Saudi Arabia or some other country that's buying it from Saudi Arabia, I have to convert my currency into US dollars to do this purchase, which forces people to be transacting around the world in US dollars. US dollar is reserve currency, which means that they have to go then through the systems of the post-war rules-based order. And if they're going through the system of the post-war rules-based order, then we have the opportunity to block their funds, to sanction them, to do all these kind of things that they just did, blocked U.S. funds held by Russia and seized the interest on what is effectively a breach of contract. Thumbing their nose, saying, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, we'll see what they do about it. So far, their attempts to destroy Russia's economy by using the US dollar as a tool of economic warfare have failed miserably. Might be successful in a country that didn't have hardcore assets that people needed to buy, but guess what? People still need to buy Russian gas. This is more troubling because it indicates, and what some commentators have said, that Saudi Arabia is looking at what's going on And it's not going to put itself at risk backing a US dollar in this way. It's going to move to a different currency. So how this shakes, that's not all going to happen tomorrow, but these are two massive steps down the road that I was talking about this last couple of years, what I called the creaking chair. Remember, the economy is like a creaking chair. You've spent all this stuff. When's it going to collapse? Well, guess what? It creaks for a long time before it goes on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Somehow, on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, all the pundits will be saying, "Well, we knew this was going to happen. It couldn't. They've all be pointing at the broken chair." But here we sit. Here we sit in this broken chair moment. Okay, that leads us to something else I wanted to just do a taster on. We're going to do this in more detail later, but I wanted to take you back to what this is all about from the world economic system, right? And that's the Great Reset, what people have called the Great Reset. And I'll circulate to people that ask connections to slide decks by various people, but it really gives a highlight of some of the things I wanted to talk about, the Great Reset. So what's happening is there's all over the world, there's resistance growing to this sort of new world order, or what many people call the new world disorder. You can see that in the European elections that have just happened. You can see as we're moving into new elections, there's a wholesale shifting. What's happening is the left, or so-called left, are freaking out because they thought they'd driven the wooden stake through the heart of the vampire. They'd almost knocked off Trump. They depersoned him. They got him off Twitter. They stopped all the platforms. They shut him down. They've taken him into lawfare. They've done all these. They put a dunce cap on him in the corner, and they're continually saying that he's illegitimate and crooked and Hitler and everything else. They've done all this stuff to shut this whole thing down. And what's happened? It's resurgent beyond their imagination. Beyond their imagination. We're going to see shift all around the cycle in this next age. And part of this is an attack against what is the Great Reset. So Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malleret, I think it is, wrote this book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, which you can look at, discussed on Tucker Carlson and many other places. And the Great Reset is basically the view that the world is going to crash. We want it to crash. We want to burn this crash, because then we can build back better. We can have this great reset of the global world order, the global economy driven by the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and push these things forward. What we have to do is to realize that we are looking through all of this for what we call truth. Truth is kingdom. You know, you shall know the truth, it says, right? John 8:32. You shall know the truth. We don't need to worry about knowing the truth. We got a better map. Our map will tell us the truth. And that truth comes with freedom, right? The Son shall make you free. You'll be free indeed. So a little bit on this Great Reset, just to paraphrase it. We're going to have a separate session. I'll give notice on it, that will be titled The Great Reset. And it's sort of linked to this fourth industrial revolution, this whole Klaus Schwab concept that there's going to be a total shift in the world economic order. And that links to the Agenda 2030, United Nations Agenda 21, it's called an Agenda 2030. You'll hear those again. And these are agendas to radically kind of change the way the world works, this global welfare state where everybody will be dependent upon a globalist state for everything. Some people call it communism, and I think if you put some quotation marks around it, I think that's really right. I think it's the next iteration of that whole demonic philosophy that had an expression in communism, and now it's having expression in whatever this thing is, right? The end of here's some of the objectives, by the way. The end of national sovereignty, abolition of private property, the restructuring of the family unit, which is why you have to destroy male and female, increasing restrictions and limitations on mobility and opportunity. The first real test of that is, let's say in Canada, can we violate the charter that gives me charter rights of mobility based upon a government diktat for something like COVID-19? And guess what? They did, and the courts went in lockstep. So really, what are your charter freedom rights? What are your fundamental rights? in the context of them all being breached by government convenience. Then the next thing is you have these so-called human settlement zones, where they want to concentrate humans into human settlement zones, which takes care of irrigation and all of these kinds of things, deals with grazing of livestock. They want to have that gone as being unsustainable. They want farmlands gone as being unsustainable. And it goes on and on and on. You can start looking at these things in detail where you go. In a article of Sheeple, you can see the United Nations agenda for the 21st century. And it really is necessitating, as some commentators have said, the abolition of faith, families, and nations. So that's from 2014 article in a journal called Sheeple, Magazine for Sleeping Slaves. Necessitates the abolition of faith, families, and nations. Faith, families, and nations. Agenda 2030, same thing. All of what we see happening in the world is part of a greater plans called Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 and Vision 2050, right? All driven from the United Nations. And some people say that it's a plan to depopulate the planet from its current population down to, some say, as little as 500 million. Now, let's see where we get to on that sinister agenda. But I do believe that people pushing this apocalyptic vision in terms of climate change and everything else, this apocalyptic vision envisages that there'll be mass extinction level events across the economy and that we have to deal with it. I think that's why people were salivating so greatly at COVID-19, which was not as severe as many of them, I thought, had hoped. Why? Because this Marxist revolutionary approach is really that they think that by blowing up enough things, paradise will be established. And you see that on the signs from protest. We picked up Antifa, we picked up the George Floyd riots, we picked up all these signs. Many of those signs are about burn it down, burn it down, burn it down, take it all down, take it all down. In South Africa, one of the interesting quotes was a chap in South Africa, Alan Boesak, B-O-E-S-A-K. He said, out of the ashes of Pretoria will arise the new Jerusalem. Ashes, out of the ashes of this old patriarchal, that's why they're going against it as being patriarch. There's nothing worth seeing there. It's all oppression, it's all collapse, it's all resulted in horror. And that's kind of the agenda that people are pushing for it. The secret agenda. Now, you can tip off into conspiracy theories. We'll spend some time in the future saying, okay, what are these conspiracies? Where does the line go between conspiracy and reality? But you can see these United Nations 2030 goals. I think many of them are euphemisms, sadly. But, you know, it's welfare dependence, it's forced vaccinations, mass indoctrination, destroy the family unit, water rationing. Now, they all have good words for them. It's kind of like massive abortion and destruction of fetuses is probably there under family benefit or health care. So we have to look at these things realistically as what they mean for us and not be continued to tie to it. One of the things that has to disappear to make this happen is privacy. So one of the central tenets around COVID-19, the World Economic Forum, all of the digital currencies that people are going through, is to eradicate privacy, to make sure that everybody is locked into some form of digital identity, which is why churches and Christians have to be on the finger on the pulse that people pushing for these things are pushing for the destruction of the world as we understand it. It's not just this is going to be better. The Great Reset aims to fundamentally re-engineer industries, societies, education, agriculture, even relationships. You can find a number of links to transhumanism and the transhumanist agenda also in these kind of teachings and some of the people around it. So we will also look at a primer on transhumanism. Right, something I've been following in quite a bit of depth, but what I want to do is give people an introduction so they understand, hey, what is going on when people say transhumanism in the church? What does it mean? We need to get a finger on the pulse of these things. So there needs to be sort of Transhumanism 101 for Christians. What does it mean? Where are we going? What's happening? Klaus Schwab declared that all aspects of our societies and economies need to be radically restructured, including our thinking and behavior. What they want to do is go in and do a radical burning down, a radical restructuring of everything that we're talking about. And of course, their poster child to do this, here's a quote from Klaus Schwab: "The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world." Guess what? They have not given up on the Great Reset. They have not given up on COVID-19 or the next bird flu or the next whatever it is. I think that the reality is that they thought they'd try these things on and be met with huge, huge pushback. I don't think that our globalist elites and our city planners ever thought that they'd get the level of compliance in free Western societies that they got. So having once exercised these powers, having seen it work, why would you ever want to give it up? You want to get back to that place where you can start engineering the world that you want to see and then calling everything else disinformation and shutting it down, right? What is the G7 partly doing? They're trying to institutionalize in all of their documentation and human rights and everything else, abortion, right? Who's standing against it? One lowly Italian prime minister who's saying, well, hang on, this is an issue. And they're trying to say, no, there are no issues. What are the Democrats trying to do in the United States? They're trying to make all of their policies law to stop Trump doing anything if he got elected. And what they can't make law, they're trying to bury in red tape and structure that they can litigate so that it would take him more than 4 years to do anything, so they can render him neutered and ineffective. They call that protecting the democratic world order. Remember, democratic world order doesn't mean the Democrat world order. The Democrat world order, democracy, protecting democracy, the democratic new world order means protecting their view of what that is, which is by and large an anti-Christian left-wing view, pro-gay marriage, pro-multiple identities, pro-fluid sexuality, pro-late-term abortion, pro-everything that perhaps the traditional church has said that they have a different view about. As Klaus Schwab said, that we moved into an area where we're now speaking of BC and AC, before coronavirus and after coronavirus eras. It's probably about as much as I'm going to talk about, but what the Great Reset is doing, and I'll go into this in a great bit more detail, is it's driving something that many people have called the Great Reformation. Things are being destabilized as we speak. Systems there's an active hand trying to bring about dramatic shifting of economies, dramatic shifting of populations. We've seen 10 plus million unqualified immigrants mainly injected into the United States. We've seen a higher per capita percentage injected into countries like Ireland, right? Dramatic shifts just in the last couple of years. And what they want to see is to bring about what? To bring about this agenda. So what does that agenda look like now that we're into this election season? We've got the US election coming up. As I spoke last time, we're coming maybe into another summer of love, which means massive brown shirt riotings anywhere that there's conservatives taking any kind of gains and positions. How do we deal in this culture? How do we deal in this culture? That's what we want to be looking at. That's what we want to understand. That's what we want to know. And that's what we're going to be looking at as we move forward into this next season. We have to know what's going on and what this means. What does reformation mean in this context? I spoke about this before, but this is where I want to leave us today. Now, this is in the context of Isaiah 49, Israel, but let's personalize it to us, because I think these statements of how God operates are still statements of how he operates. Thus says the Lord God, starting at verse 22, Isaiah 49, "Behold, I will lift up my hand to the Gentile nations and set up my standard and raise high my signal banner to the people." Listen, when we understand what's going on and we raise a righteous standard, when we say, for example, to this sort of euphemistic, all kinds of different ways to God, when we say, no, there's only one way to God. Jesus never said to treat all faiths equally. He said there's only one way to God, that's through me. All else are liars and robbers. We don't tolerate the liars and robbers. When somebody comes and says, hey, I want you to give equal treatment and have some imam singing in your church. No, we don't facilitate liars and robbers. We call them out. We raise a righteous standard. So this is what he's talking about. His standard is raised high, his signal banner to the people, right? Then it says, they will bring your sons in the bosom of their garments. In other words, helping them, loving them. And your daughters will be carried on their shoulders. And the kings shall be your foster fathers and guardians, and their queens your wet nurses. So wet nurses are generally hired to nurse babies. You know, they didn't have bottles and things back then. So you have a servant nursing your children. Well, they're saying their queens will be wet nurses for you. They shall bow down to you, their faces to the earth, and lick up the dust of your feet, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Well, how do we know when he's the Lord? When he raises this righteous standard. How does he raise this righteous standard on the earth? We raise it. We raise it by decreeing and declaring, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We declare, we have the obligation and authority to declare on this earth what's happening in kingdom. And when we do make these declarations, this is what happens. He mobilizes this heavenly army to cause these things to happen. So let me keep going on this. For they will know that I am the Lord, for they, that's us, shall not be put to shame who wait for, look for, and expect me. And here's the question that we need to speak, because we talk about the Great Reset, we're talking about all of these powerful people, we're talking about global economies and all this kind of stuff, and here we are, a bunch of Christians, right? Shall the prey be taken from the mighty? Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, the mighty, right? Shall the prey be taken from the mighty, or the lawful captives of the just be delivered? Even if it's lawful, even if they've created some structure where they've got some lawful rights, shall this happen? Here's the answer, verse 25. For thus says the Lord, even the captives of the mighty will be taken away, and the prey of the terrible will be delivered. For I will contend with him who contends with you, and I will give safety to your children and ease to them. I will contend. Now, how do we get God to contend? People read this and say, oh, God's going to contend. No, he isn't. You got to have a righteous standard raised. You got to be engaged in the understanding. If you're part of the crowd just swept along on the boat with Jezebel, wondering what's happening, wonder if Ahab's going to have a good Christmas party, and you're embedded in this world system, that is not your portion. We need to claim that portion for us by engaging. So Great Reset, World Economic Forum, whoever else is coming up with an ungodly agenda to destroy the worlds that we want to have lived in, we say, no, we raise a righteous standard against you. Your knee will bow to Jesus, right? Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. The Lordship is Jesus is my portion. I am like Hezekiah, right? Speaking to the attacking army that I have a God. I have a God that will overcome. I have a God that will deliver. I have a God that will restore. And so we're talking about this great reformation, as people try and put in place a great reset, it's like Haman coming up with this great plan to deal with the Jews. Right? Oh, I've got this great plan. I'm going to have them all killed. God turns these things around when we raise a righteous declaration. So right now, in the name of Jesus, I just declare over every person listening to the sound of my voice, over the 7,000, over what God is doing in the ecclesia, that we are the righteous remnant and we raise a righteous standard in the face of all of these obstacles and declare kingdom come. Your will be done in the name of Jesus. Amen.